Is art atheism? Are atheists artists? Do atheists art? Do atheists worship art? Maybe these questions and more will be answered in this video called Atheists Have a Religion. It's called Art, which is from a fascinating channel that I found called The Artist is the Enemy, which is about exactly what you think. Artists are bad people. All art is just self-interest in disguise. Artists are motivated by revenge, not passion. Artists want creative control so they can play God. Artists should be grateful when their work is stolen. Art requires being insensitive to people and life. Creative vision is just a narcissistic hallucination. The artist's muse is a victim, not a goddess. Artists pretend to love nature while destroying it. And Art, the Religion of the Godless, which is the video that we're looking at, when I downloaded it, it was still called Atheists Have a Religion, it's called Art, which I think is a much more artistically compelling title. I have not seen a channel on this topic before. If nothing else, it's original, and I appreciate that. Now, I gotta say, on account of the originality of the concept, I don't quite know how to approach this, so I guess I'll just talk, and however it comes out is how it comes out. I'll just let my muse victim guide me.
Picture the modern, highly educated creative class.
Okay, hold on.
The art lovers, the writers, the filmmakers, critics, curators. They view traditional religion with a mix of pity and disdain as a primitive crutch for weak-minded people who need a sky daddy to tell them how to live.
That seems like an extremely broad generalization. I wouldn't be surprised at all if people in these categories tended a bit more secular or a bit more non-traditional. But to say as just a blunt statement of fact that people involved in these things are not traditionally religious, full stop, is just false. But that's not the claim. The claim is that they view it with pity and disdain, and as a crutch, and as primitive, and for weak-minded people, and based on belief in a sky daddy. That's a much stronger general claim, and as such is much less believable than the other one. Which is a problem, because the reason you're stating this up front is that this is what I have to buy into to accept the rest of your argument. But I don't. Obviously, it's true of some, maybe even many, I don't know, but I know it's not 100%. And if you're going to build an argument on the premise that it's somewhere close to 100%, then you're going to have to do something to make that convincing. But you're not even going to try, you're just going to move on as if that's obvious fact.
They mock the religious for worshipping a book that was written 2,000 years ago. But watch what happens when this exact same type walks into an art museum. They go completely silent. They tilt their heads. They put their hands behind their backs. They'll speak in hushed, reverent tones about transcendence and the human spirit. And if you talk too loud and you're like, yeah, whatever, they'll shush you.
But what, when religious people walk into an art museum, they babble incessantly and annoy everyone? I doubt that's generally true. Go to an art museum that's not showing modern art, and instead is showing a bunch of Renaissance religious paintings, where there may well be a higher proportion of Christians in attendance, and I doubt you're going to find that place full of rowdies like you find down at Bob's Country Bunker. Or instead of an art museum, go to a natural history museum, or an archaeological museum, or a science museum, or a small town history museum. Or an antique shop, a bookstore, a library, a study hall, a movie theater, the bus, the train, a cathedral, a castle. Watch the behavior of people in any of these kind of places. Religious, non-religious, it doesn't matter. In most cases, it's going to be culturally discouraged to act loud and annoying in those places. Maybe the movie theater is a bit of an exception here, especially if it's the first ever showing of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. But generally, people are going to be pretty quiet in these settings. Doesn't matter if they're religious or non-religious. Why? Because it's a closed-in common area where a bunch of people you're not talking to can hear you so much as clear your throat, sometimes even with full reverb effect, and the culture, arbitrarily but genuinely, frowns upon being a noisy jackass in such places. And so when you act like one and annoy other people on purpose, they're gonna shush you. Or at least I would say you deserve for them to. Frankly, I would shush you if you're yelling around in the Canadian Tire, but that's just me. I am an extremely northern cold culture kind of person. I just want people to shut up. You say these art types mock religion and everything, but watch what they do when they walk into an art gallery. They fall silent, and that shows something apparently about their attitude towards art. Okay, well, what happens when they walk into a church? Do you think the average person from that same group is likely to suddenly be extremely loud and obnoxious in a church because they don't have the same reverence for God that they apparently have for the art? Does that really sound plausible, even? I don't think so. I'm sure there is the odd dickhead out there, but that's the case with anything. And finally, on the topic of people talking about transcendence and the human spirit, anyone can talk pretentious twaddle. That's not an atheist thing.
And if you touch the painting, which I highly recommend you do, they go crazy, they lose it.
Oh, you're the dickhead. See, there's always a few. Now see, me, I'm not the dickhead. I recommend that if people go into a church, they don't go sticking their greasy fucking fingers on everything. It's not about what the thing is. If it's a statue of Jesus or a statue of, a urinal or whatever bullshit they have in modern art museums now, it's equally disrespectful to other people. It's their property, it's their effort, they may well have to clean up after you, maybe you even damage it. That could easily be the case with a painting. And then if it's an investment that potentially impacts the value, or at least results in costs for restoration, this is not some religious issue. It's an expectation that you don't act intentionally antisocial. This kind of juvenile nonsense is on the level of those guys who used to go around opening up the ice creams in the store and licking them and putting them back. You act like an ass, you lick the ice cream and put it back, people get upset with you when they notice, and then instead of showing any shame at being a ridiculous example of a human, you go, what, is ice cream your god or something? Why are you worshipping ice cream?
Because they're not just looking at art. They're performing mass.
No, they're looking at art, and nothing you've said here contradicts that in any way. When you act like you're running a YouTube prank channel in your everyday life without even bothering to have a camera, obviously, regardless of the specifics of the circumstances, people are going to react how you would expect. What an argument, man. Like, people get mad when I break things and yell in public, so they must be worshipping whatever's around me at the time.
The demographics of the art world are not an accident. Go to a gallery opening in New York or London.
2 cities with like 30% non-religious people. Gee, I wonder why you picked those cities. Well, in that case, I think you're right. The demographics are not an accident. You didn't pick New York and London by accident. Also, that image has got to be based on Taylor Swift, right? Isn't she a Christian?
Go to film festivals or music festivals. Go to concerts.
Music festivals and concerts. So places that are anything but quiet like an art museum. The argument is people are quiet in the presence of art because they're having mass, but concerts and music festivals count as art too. You can't even make up your own damn mind.
You will find the highest concentration of atheists and agnostics on the planet.
I don't think you're giving me the best advice, because what we mainly got out here is country music. If I were to throw a dart at a board and pick a random concert, and then throw a dart at the crowd and hit a random person, that person would not likely be an atheist. And look, I don't find it implausible that concert goers would have a bigger proportion of non-religious people than the general population, because the general population includes older generations who were more religious, and concert goers on the whole tend to skew younger. Millennials, Zoomers, and those generations are less religious. So that would not be a shocking revelation. That doesn't make concerts an atheist thing. That doesn't make music a religion. If what you're claiming about the demographics is in fact true, it doesn't imply what you're insinuating it does. You would need a further argument to establish that. And so far, your only actual argument for that is that people don't like you when you act like a disrespectful jerk-off, which also doesn't get you to your desired conclusion.
Why?
Because the argument has to actually follow. Oh, why are concerts full of atheists? You tell me, man.
Because you cannot kneel in 2 different directions at once.
What does that even mean? You can't be religious and also listen to music or watch movies? Why, you're gonna have to tell that to fucking everybody, because it's news to all of them.
It's a zero-sum game for all.
No, it isn't. Why would that be true? You can't feel awed by your religion and also feel awed by a sweeping crescendo in the music or an epic climax in the movie. It's impossible. Yep, but it's not. People manage that all the time. Christians watch movies. Christians listen to music. Christians go to concerts. Saying, oh, the proportion of atheists at concerts is higher than the general population doesn't change that. You can't just sweep this huge portion of the population, this huge aspect of the culture under the rug and pretend it's not a thing. People are not so stupid that they're not going to notice.
If you believe in God, art is just a craft. It's a nice way to decorate the world that God made. That's it.
I really do not think that the people in the past who produced all that spectacular religious art would have been nearly so dismissive and reductive. It seems to me that when the word just comes up in a context like this, like for example, you're just molecules in motion, morality's just a taste like your favorite ice cream, that kind of thing, they're intentionally trying to diminish it for some reason that serves their argument. If anything, the, as you say, sometimes kind of reverential sounding ways of talking about art that you hear from time to time are rooted in the Christian history of art, when art was a literal tool of reverence, meant to make you feel awe, to inspire religious feeling in you. I would say it's a conceptual leftover of a bygone age that's managed to hang on a little bit, in non-religious circles obviously more likely figuratively, but I would be very skeptical that it's as common as it used to be, especially outside of directly religious conversation, which of course still happens around art.
But if you are an atheist, if you believe the universe is a cold, random, meaningless void,
one or the other? Or are you trying to imply that these are somehow the same thing?
then that painting is the only magic you have left.
No, then that painting would be cold, random, and meaningless too, just like everything else. If that were truly somebody's position on life, why would a painting be exempt? This extreme nihilism that so many religious people think atheism is, or at least requires, wouldn't leave room for all of this bullshit about awe and transcendence and the human spirit. If everything's pointless and meaningless and empty and there's no way to see it any other way without a god, then that's just how it is. You can't have it both ways just because you want your argument to sound better. Either atheism is not necessarily what you portray it as, or the relationship of atheists to art isn't what you portray it as. Something's gotta give here.
Art is a specific religion for people who think they are too smart for religion.
I think I'm too smart for this art religion, or to think it's a thing.
When the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche famously declared, "God is dead," in the 19th century,
Wonder how badly you'll misinterpret that.
he thought humanity would go insane staring into the void.
I think go insane is a big overstatement. More just become negative and nihilistic, which is different from insanity. Also, God is Dead and this are from two different books. Granted, I think there's a strong conceptual connection, but you're talking as if the one directly follows from the other in his presentation, and that's not the case.
But we didn't go insane. We didn't stare into the void. We just hung a painting in front of it.
Atheists have made a religion about looking at paintings to distract themselves from the cold, meaningless void that they don't want to look at. Look, I understand the claim, but it doesn't seem to be based on anything. You haven't made an argument for this other than there's a higher proportion of atheists who go to concerts, and people don't like it when you stick your fingers on their stuff. If anything, this seems like yet another example of religious people just struggling to understand atheists. If I didn't believe in God, everything would seem so terrible and empty. I would go insane just from the thought of it. Well, that's not the case. That's not how the world looks from an atheist perspective. That's how the world looks from an atheist perspective made up in a theist's imagination. And then following from that comes, if I thought that, I would have to come up with some sort of a religion to distract me from that feeling. Religion is the only solution. Well, again, no. That's the perspective of someone so immersed in religion they can't even conceive of the possibility of another point of view. And then, because so many of the atheists don't appear to have a religion, you have to start looking around for something that could plausibly pass for their religion, because surely there must be one. Everyone has one. You can't just not. Oh, those people paid $12 to go look at a couple paintings on a Friday evening date. Well, that settles it then. That gallery must be the same thing as a church. You're trying to fit people and activities and hobbies and interests into a mold approximating your religion that they just don't fit into. You seem to lack the imagination to do anything else.
Art became a substitute drug.
A substitute to the other drug of religion, I assume. Are you basically using the opium of the masses analogy? That's atypical for this kind of video, to say the least.
In the 19th century, around this time, when religion was rapidly declining, the art world rose to its highest power ever.
Highest power in what sense? Definitely not money. Remember, you're not just including paintings here. You're including film, music, novels, right? You mentioned writers. All art. And I would say in terms of money and sheer cultural influence, the 20th century blew the 19th century out of the water on all those fronts, even including the amount of money put into and made from paintings and museums, but certainly film and music, of course, because you couldn't record film or music before the 20th century. You know what, in fairness, maybe what you mean is not that it was at its peak in the 19th century, but it was rising in the 19th century. That'd make a bit more sense.
It became so powerful so fast.
Look, these people are standing in a room with stuff in it, and these people are standing in a room with stuff in it. So, yeah.
Because art acted as a methadone clinic for a civilization that was coming off of the high of religion.
Nothing to do with technology, distribution, ease of travel, even just the amount of money available in general, the various European empires. Look, you have an interesting hypothesis here, and I'm not going to say that it's wrong, as in not a factor at all. I think it's plausible, at least, that to some extent people would seek out experiences that produce feeling within them more regularly if they're not getting as much of that kind of input from church. People, of course, like things that make them feel a certain way. Religion, of course, can do it, but producing feeling is not something unique to religion. And if you feel something in relation to something you encounter, that's not you engaging in religion. And likewise for the social aspect, which you haven't mentioned really, but I think a lot of what draws people towards art is being able to talk to other people about it, shared interest. And of course, that's another thing that also shows up in religion, but is not exclusive to it. So the point is, I could see it as plausible that a decline in religiosity could have a role in an increased interest in other things. But I think that to reduce an increased interest in art to just one factor like that, without, I should mention, even demonstrating that it was a factor in the first place, is idiotic. And you can't expect people to just swallow that because you've said it.
Art is diet God. All the flavor, none of the guilt. You don't have to change your life. You don't have to obey any commandments.
Yeah, in fact, you don't have to do anything like religion with it. There's sort of not a single religious feature to it unless it's religious art. Kneel in front of the exquisitely carved Jesus on the cross, sure. Then there's a religious component. But otherwise, it's such diet God that it seems not to be one at all. And to pretend that it's functioning like some kind of god or religion is very silly, because they're not actually all that comparable. Oh, but yeah, people tend to keep their voices down in art galleries. And thou shalt not vandalize the paintings. How could I forget? Of course it must be a religion.
Religion demands obedience. It demands that you change your life.
Okay, and you just said that art doesn't demand that, so art is not a religion. Thank you.
Art offers the exact same emotional swell, but it demands nothing of you.
Is it just me, or is this comparison between art and religion getting real small? At this point, it's art's not a religion, but it produces emotion, and religion also produces emotion. Therefore nothing. We don't have our conclusion anymore. There's no therefore it's a religion now. That got discarded somewhere along the way here.
It demands nothing except the price of a ticket.
As the viewer, yeah, exactly. It's a pastime. It's a thing you do just because you feel like doing something. You pay the ticket and you go in and look at the art, which is what you said they're not doing. You said they're having mass.
And what about Nietzsche?
No, it's Friedrich Nietzsche.
The most famous atheist in history.
I won't argue with that. I think he's a pretty solid contender for the title.
The ultimate godless intellectual. The man who said that religion is a crutch for the weak, and that only the strong could bear to live in a godless universe.
Based? Although I don't actually think that's true at all. Sure, if you're brought up in religion or some sort of religious culture that makes you think that this kind of thinking is necessary to just get along in life, and then you realize it's all bullshit, sure, that can be a problem that you have to kind of work your way through. And sometimes people can fall into sort of sad sack ways of thinking as a result. But you can work your way through it and not have that problem anymore. And if you're not raised into that problem in the first place, it's just not a problem. You just live. Weak or strong, it doesn't really matter. There's nothing motivating you into this extreme existential angst over something that was never a factor for you in the first place.
Look at his private life.
Why? What does that have to do with whether anything he wrote was correct or incorrect?
Forget look. Just take a glance. This was a man who was obsessively addicted to the approval of the classical composer Richard Wagner.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Being desperate for attention is kind of lame. And I suppose that's an uncharitable but arguably more or less accurate way to describe the early relationship. But what do Nietzsche's personal foibles have to do with the argument that art galleries are atheist church? Why are we talking about something so painfully irrelevant?
Like the earth revolves around the sun, Nietzsche's life revolved around Wagner. He wrote fawning letters. He followed Wagner around wherever he went. He spent whatever little money he had constantly going broke just to go and see Wagner. And eventually, they had a falling out. And how do you think Nietzsche reacted? Did he react like a very irrational person?
Probably not. I assume the point of the story is the answer is no. Frankly, I've never been all that convinced Nietzsche was that rational of a person anyway. That's not a criticism. I just think of him as much more on the passionate side. From what I've seen of Nietzsche's philosophy, which admittedly is not much, it's not thorough, he leans much more to the emotional side and also just kind of tosses out ideas that he finds interesting. I get the impression that he's quite often inconsistent with himself because he has an approach much more like, here's a thought, and here's a thought, and that's a thought, and wow, that's a thought. I think he's a lot more exploratory than systematic. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's the impression I've gotten.
No. He reacted like a scorned lover. He blasted Nietzsche, publicly and bitterly.
Nietzsche blasted Nietzsche? No, Nietzsche blasted Wagner. Little slip of the tongue there. It's kind of weird to imply, though, that a rational person must never react like a scorned lover, or ever lash out at some other person for something. You're telling me, look, he didn't react like a rational person, as if that's supposed to tell me something about his writings beyond this personal circumstance, as if that's supposed to call their rationality into question. But no, reading and evaluating those works is what's going to establish or refute their rationality to me. The guy having some kind of messed up personal relationship doesn't say anything about that.
The man who killed God.
Nietzsche never said he killed God. That's not even close to what the death of God was about. That was a commentary on the psychological state of the modern world, and he wasn't saying it was a positive thing. Quite the contrary, in fact.
Spent his whole life worshipping a musician.
Clearly not. Even by your recounting, he did not spend his whole life doing that. But yes, for some of his life, he was a big fan of Wagner. They had a personal relationship about which Nietzsche was perhaps a little too enthusiastic, which made for more hard feelings when it broke down. Yet again, you're trying to portray things as if it's some kind of a substitute religion. He was worshipping a musician, when in actual fact, it's just a fairly standard situation of one person being a little too invested in another. And if you're going to try to tell me that religious people don't have the exact same kind of personal problems, you're totally full of it. Having said that, though, sure, Nietzsche fell down upon his hands and knees and put his forehead on the floor and cried, Richard Wagner, du bist jetzt mein einziger Gott. Ich verehre dich. Deine Musik ist meine Religion. That's true history now. If so, so what? Weird dude does weird thing? No way. How could that happen? Nobody's under any illusions about Nietzsche. He was definitely not a normal guy. It would not be at all surprising if he did some weird shit. And weird or not, he does not represent or define millions of people. So of what relevance is any of this to anything? You're so desperate to make this into a thing that you just say random stuff and hope it'll convince somebody.
Nietzsche also once said, another one of his most well-known quotes, one of his top 3 most famous well-known sayings, and you have probably heard this before.
Maybe. I could not care any less about some random quote from some random guy. What does this tell me about the actual world here and now?
He said, without music, life would be a mistake.
Whoa, what? Friedrich Nietzsche, music fan? And also he didn't believe in God too at the same time? I didn't know those were 2 things anyone ever did together. Thank you for this random pointless quote mine about this. I feel so educated.
That is not a rational statement.
I know, it's a statement of feeling.
That is a religious confession.
No, it is not. Religious confession is not the sole alternative to rational statement. Believe it or not, people can have feelings that are not religious.
If life is a mistake without music, then music is the savior. Music is the redeemer.
Who knows? Maybe he would have even liked that kind of hyperbolic language. That doesn't mean he would think that literally. Just as a statement doesn't have to be rational, it also doesn't have to be literal. In this case, what he's saying is, I think the thing is really, really cool, and I wouldn't like life as much without it, which I'm sure went for many things, or does for many other people. Also, I wouldn't put it past Nietzsche to write some weird shit like, music is the redeemer. That doesn't tell me anything about anyone else, man. Your arguments suck balls.
He took down a shrine to God and built a shrine to a composer.
He did neither thing, don't lie. Now you're trying to turn it into he was actually worshipping the guy. He wasn't putting Wagner in the place of God. Wanting somebody's attention and approval is not worship. It's an absolutely ludicrous conflation. Also, you keep bouncing back and forth between the object of his attention being the guy and the music. Very different things.
He took down the shrine over there and built a shrine over here. The art lover hasn't destroyed the church. They just gentrified it. They replaced the priest with the curator. They replaced the red wine with white wine. And they replaced the cross with a canvas and performances.
And we replaced all the religion with it not being one.
And this is why we whisper in museums. This is why we treat the creative process as if it's some sacred myth that we have to respect.
Is there anything new to say to any of this? Not really. I think you're basically just repeating yourself now. In which case, let's keep it rolling.
Because if we just admitted that art is just labor, it's just a depressed guy putting paint on a tablecloth, or a musician vibrating the air, it would ruin this sacred myth of art.
The guy's not always depressed. Perhaps even usually not, I don't know. But there was that just again. You're just molecules in motion, same general thing. Addressing everything you don't like in these dismissive, minimizing, reductive kind of terms. I don't know if it's that useful. It's basically just an indirect argument that if something is physical, you shouldn't care about it. That you somehow must see it as lesser or trivial. Which is not going to do a whole lot for anyone who's thinking about it even a little bit. But you can reduce your thinking about things to this level. It's not like it's factually inaccurate. Art is a human activity done through physical means. Music is ultimately just vibrations in the air, regardless of the human perception and interpretation of it that gives it meaning. Paintings are just a bunch of crap on a cloth. It's true. Obviously, it's intended to belittle, but that's okay. Why are you acting like people are gonna disagree that art is a human activity? Obviously, that's what it is. What kind of pretentious goofball are you imagining being your opposition to this? By the way, I don't even know what the sacred myth of art is.
And people would be left again staring into a void in a cold, random universe.
Wait, so apparently to not think you live in a cold, random universe, you have to believe some sort of sacred myth about the origin of art. I seriously don't even know what you're talking about. You're just kind of saying gibberish now. I thought looking at the art and having the art make you feel good was the thing distracting you from the void. But no, it's something about a belief about the objective nature of art or something? That it actually is some kind of sacred entity? I have no idea, dude. Either explain it or who cares.
People need the artist to be a mystic because they need the art to function as an anchor for their souls.
A mystic? People go to a concert, listen to WAP. Oh, she's a mystic. The sacred myth of wet-ass pussy. You were talking about film festivals, directors. You were talking about writers. These are just people who make entertainment. And then paintings, like, yeah, it's a guy who painted a thing. It's of no religious significance. The guy's not a mystic. Religious significance comes with a religious intention. Seriously, what are you even talking about now? You're saying this as if this is going to be clear somehow. But it's not. It's anything but clear. Can you just speak clearly? Ironically, you're trying to phrase things artistically instead of just saying what you mean.
And this isn't a modern trend.
It's not? I thought this was a 19th century thing. The current modern trend of it, that is. There may have been other trends, but they were different trends. But no, never mind. Apparently it's not a modern trend.
Throughout history, the men who have claimed to rely on reason have been hopelessly addicted to romance.
Sometimes, sure. Why would those have to be mutually exclusive? And what does that have to do with religion?
They tore down the churches, but they couldn't bear to live in the rubble, so they built museums instead.
Throughout history, people were tearing down churches and building museums, were they? When? Where? Tearing down churches was not a very common historical pastime, unless they were hopelessly rotten or something, I suppose. Specifically, what are you talking about as a phenomenon that's occurred throughout history? You're just saying things with no apparent connection at this point.
I wrote a book that completely exposes this entire system.
System? There's a system now?
It's called The Artist is the Enemy: Why We Let the Most Broken People on Earth Command Our Lives.
Alright, well if nothing else, it's a pretty badass cover. I assume it's AI generated, but I like the blood brush.
If you want to understand who's pulling the strings of our modern world...
Oh no, wait, we're gonna find out about how they are secretly the artists? That's the last people I would have suspected. I thought it was the
and how to finally stop worshipping the people who built that cage that you're sitting in.
The construction company?
Then this book is for you. It'll be out in about 2 weeks on Amazon.
Great. Am I interested enough in this to actually do a book review of that? I could use a book review to tide me over, but I don't know. This is a pretty weird topic. It's kind of out of my usual niche, but I'll consider it. But for now, thank you for watching, everybody. Please do subscribe and like. Huge thanks to every single one of my supporters, and I'll see you soon.